Smashing. So, hi, I'm Kim, and this is Steph, and we're from
Hi.
Ventures. We're a social enterprise who specialise in community archaeology projects. We're here today to present some of the findings from our community excavation at Caerfai Promontory Fort, or Penpladii as it's known locally, which happened over this summer. So Caerfai Camp, or Penpladii, is a scheduled monument consisting of the remains of a promontory hill fort, which is nestled behind 4 defensive rampart ditches. The camp is located to the southeast of St David's in Pembrokeshire, and it's accessible via the Pembrokeshire Coastal Path. The fort has never been excavated before, and it's only been studied remotely. So very little was known about it before we got to it, but a geophysical survey undertaken a few years ago revealed some really exciting features and targets for us to focus our excavations on. So why did we excavate? So the dig formed part of a 6-year project between Ireland and Wales called the Cherish Project. Cherish aims to raise awareness and understanding of the past, present and near future impacts of climate change on the cultural heritage of our sea and coast. So as you can see from this aerial photograph, coastal erosion is slowly eating away at the narrow isthmus that the promontory fort is situated on. So time is really running out for us to excavate and understand these remains before they're lost to the sea forever. But it's quite a beautiful sight really, as you can see from that picture. So a quick note on the dig statistics. So our excavation ran from the 2nd of September to the 15th of September, and we had upwards of 12 volunteers with us every day, which was fantastic. We shared posts and photographs on our dig timeline, as well as on Facebook and Twitter, and some of our posts reached 12,000 people from around the world, which was amazing to pull in so many people into the experience. Even though we had 2 scheduled site tours a day, because we're situated on the coastal path, we ended up meeting upwards of 300 people over the 2 weeks, inviting people in to see our finds, to see the trenches. And it was just brilliant to deliver this experience to so many local people and so many people from across the country that had come to Pembrokeshire for the holidays. Our youngest venturer was 12 and our oldest was in their 80s, and it was their bucket list dream to dig in an excavation, so we couldn't really say no. So it was just fantastic experience really for everyone. Okay, so I will hand over to Steph, who's going to go through our trenches, what we found, and some of the key features and why we were digging, especially on the ramparts. So over to Steph for now.
Thanks, Kim. So our first trench that we'll be discussing today was located over the defensive ramparts to the north of the fort. It was really located there to understand 3 main things. We wanted to find out the level of erosion and damage that had been caused by overgrowth and other environmental forces. We wanted to try to establish, if it was possible, the chronology or the sequence of the ramparts construction. And then we also wanted to try to see if we could figure out what the composition and construction methods were, which were used to build the ramparts themselves. So as you can see on our next slide, we have our excavation trench, which was quite narrow and quite awkward. It was split into 2 parts because of the steep conditions. The first part, the top part visible here on this screen, was located on the top of the northernmost rampart, which was the largest, and it was the most obviously affected by vegetation. As we excavated, it became apparent that indeed the rooting from the blackthorn and bracken had penetrated into the topmost 30 to 40 centimeters of the rampart surface. I don't know if you can see there on the top image with the ranging poles, but yeah, that first top bit where you can see all the rooting there. And then additionally, we saw that there was an extensive network of animal burrows carving their way through the interior of the ramparts. Now, when you look at this cross section in the slide, you can see that large animal burrow, which is in the back corner. That's actually about 4 meters above the ground level. So when you look at the picture with the people there in it, you can see where that trench is located at the very top. If you click one more time, Kim, you can see that where that arrow is. That's where that rodent burrow is. So it's essentially riddled with networks of animal burrowing, and then the top bit that isn't animal burrow ridden is root impacted. So it left us with about 15 to 20 centimeters of space where there wasn't either animal or rooting disturbing the rampart. So it was quite extensively damaged. So they really, we did do a lot of thinking around what it was that was making this rampart so attractive. And the two key things that we think is the fact that the large rampart is more prominent, thus it spends a greater amount of time in the sun. So it might be quite nice and toasty for animals. And then it is noticeably less affected by stone. It's a lot less compact material, and there's a lot more earth for them to form less resistance for the animals to burrow into. So despite the appearance of stone in that top image, to where you see our cross section there, it's actually relatively modest amount of stone, and it was only in that very topmost bit where you see that, which is in stark contrast to what we found to the bottom, to the southern aspect of the rampart. If you go to the next slide, Kim, there we go. So there you have quite a different picture of what the rampart looked like at the bottom and going on to the southern rampart. There's just a whole lot more stone material. It was much more compact, much more difficult to excavate. It was astonishing really how different the two ramparts were in terms of composition. So as we excavated the lower level, we were able to see what appeared to be the sequence of what appears that the larger of the two ramparts appeared to have been more recently constructed, and the smaller, more possibly well constructed of the two was the earlier of the two ramparts. And what we ended up noticing was that despite the fact that the larger was the more recent, it seems to have degraded quite quickly into the ditch and filled up silted up the ditch earlier than the wall collapse there at the top of what would have been the ditch feature. So we do get a little bit of insight into the chronology of this, even just at such a shallow depth. But another nice thing that we found was, if you can see there in the image of that southern rampart, was a dry laid stone wall, which appears to be the remains of the stone facing, which we had hoped to find evidence of, or some kind of evidence to see if these had stone facing, these ramparts. And it does appear that the smaller one had, at the very least at the base, had this really nice stone facing that came up at least to the extent that we've uncovered it, which would have been probably higher up than what it looks now as the central ditch has silted up and filled in. And then that large amount of rubble that you see in the middle, we believe was from the collapse of that facing in large part. If you look at the cross section of the lower part of the trench that we did, I've got here, there we have, you can see on the northern side, I don't know if it's quite as apparent as it is in the picture, but the smaller, the smaller bits of stone were clearly associated with the northern rampart, and the large, big, rubbly bits, which were interspersed throughout the soil matrix, were all impacted into the smaller southern aspect there. But there is a cross section of our trench there. So then that moves us away from the northern rampart excavation, which was quite narrow and small comparatively, and into our main trench, our main excavation area. So this main excavation was south of the ramparts and located on the isthmus that Kim was showing us and talking to us about. As she said, it's urgently at risk from the erosion of the cliffs just on the west, especially on the western aspect. Now, we had some geophysical anomalies that we were trying to test in this location. We used all of this information, though, to inform the location of Trench 1 here. So this trench really was what we call an evaluation trench. Nobody, as Kim mentioned, has ever dug on this site before, so we didn't really know what we would find. And the geophysics had some issues as well. There was a lot of magnetic interference from the stones. So we didn't know, although there were some hot spots here that we thought were promising, we really didn't know what we were going to find when we arrived. So we found quite a bit, actually. Fortunately for us, we did find quite a bit. So if we go to the next slide, you can see it oriented. The north is at the top, the south is at the bottom. And to the north, we found evidence of quite a bit of rubble. And it appears after doing some excavation that was not just rubble. It appears to be a compact stone surface to the west, running perpendicular to the cliff edge, and where the slope is slightly more gradual on the eastern side. We found evidence of a possible terracing effort to contour the landscape and build level surfaces, abutting the lowest interior rampart. Similar terracing has been seen in nearby hill forts, so we think this is a good possible interpretation for what was going on. We weren't able to find much other kind of explanation for it for this really stark contrast, which we started to see emerging between the northern aspect of the trench with this large amount of stone to just beyond that big rubble mound. We saw, as we proceed further south, an alignment, east-west alignment of stone that looked more like a possible structural wall or demarcation of space. And it was associated with a sudden stop to the rubble. And instead of rubble, we started to find a high concentration of burn material, just dark, charred, organic soil, and in that soil was little bits and pieces of what looked like really very, very carbonized bone. So very, what you would normally consider to be cremated bone, not human bone, but very long exposed bone to heat. So amongst all of that, we also started to find little bits of flat laid stones. So we've no longer had this really random rubbly material. We started to see these flat laid stones that were either themselves a surface or lying upon a surface. And as we excavated down onto that level, that is where the real excitement started to emerge. So suddenly, rather than just accumulating deposits, we started to see distinct shapes, which we call features, popping out of the ground. So they appeared in the form of stone clusters popping up in the midst of otherwise relatively clear soil. I think if we go to the next slide, you see a good picture of, so you see it can be difficult to really see that isn't anything other than just maybe a cluster of stones. But actually, when you get a kind of further out, the top right corner there, you see how clear of material the surrounding area was. It was quite obvious that these were not just randomly placed, and they're already also upright and wedged down rather than lying in a position that looks like it's just sat on top of the earth. So if we go to the next, click forward again, you can see a nice, I think, slide. Yeah, there you go. A nice section of one of these clusters of stone. So this is a post hole. And as we excavated down into it, you can start to really see the contours. You can see the stones are falling into a certain pattern. They aren't sitting level. They're sloping down into the fill. And that is how we kind of determine, in addition to the soil changes, we can kind of determine what the fill and the extent of those post holes are. Now, we did not find much inside of the post holes. They were crammed full of stone, which was a really clever way for them to both firmly plant their posts, but also give them some more prolonged life, so that the wooden post doesn't rot in the soil. But other than that, we didn't find a bunch of material. But around the surface of these post holes, we did find some really special material. And I'm going to pass it back over to Kim, and she can talk you through some of our more interesting finds.
Lovely, thanks, Steph. So amongst this area of occupation that Steph was mentioning, amongst all the bits of charcoal and the post holes, one of our venturers, Phil, found this beautiful little thumbnail scraper, which was quite a find, really, given how tiny it is. It was just plonked right next to the surface of flat stones, so the possible occupational surface. So they're often associated with the Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures. They were seen as the penknife of the prehistoric toolkit. They would have been kept and used for working on small everyday items which needed cutting, trimming, or whittling. So it's a brilliant find, really, and evidence that, people were walking about in our fort doing things. It's sort of tangible evidence that people were utilising the fort or buildings. Another super find was from venturer Josh. So he found this lovely Spindle Well, which was further north in the trench. You can see the detail of where they've been boring through. So they've been using some kind of scraper or point to sort of whittle through the centre of the Spindle Well. But unfortunately, the holes didn't quite meet in the middle. So the find never made it to its intended use. So it was just cast aside, but lucky for us, because again, it's evidence that they weren't just, they were possibly weaving or making nets or something on the site, which is amazing. So this is a very exciting discovery. Pottery is such a rare find on Welsh hill forts. We're still waiting for specialist analysis to date it, but we're going to assume that it's early Iron Age from what we know from the surrounding area, and when the other 12 hill forts along the Pembrokeshire coast alone were in use. So I think Steph found this, which is why she looks so happy and smiley there. The photo in the top right corner is a bit of fired clay with slag on the bottom. So this is interesting because the fired clay seems to have integrated into the slag, which is a byproduct of metalworking. And it's a very similar in colour to the piece of pottery that Steph is holding there. So it suggests that the pottery manufacturing and the smelting process was likely very local, and they sourced the clay from right next to the fort itself, because it's sort of the same material making the fired clay and making the pottery. But this could also explain why there's so little of it surviving. This is all we found on the site, and Iron Age pottery is very rare, especially in Pembrokeshire. So, the low quality clay would have only been suitable for low temperature firing, which just wouldn't have survived as well as elsewhere across the country. This was a brilliant find as well. So we found quite a lot of this. So this is copper slag. So this is a direct byproduct of copper smelting, which proves that we had industrial activities happening on our site. This was found near the charcoal deposits, but we didn't find the kiln or anything like that. So we think we were near the kiln, but not quite on it with our trench. We also found a lot of iron slag as well. So they were smelting iron and smelting copper to make things on our site, which is brilliant. Last but not least, we found a ton of slingshots and rubbing stones. So the slingshots were identified by Dr. Toby Driver. They fit perfectly in the palm of your hand, and they would have caused a fair bit of damage being thrown from the fort down towards the sea. And on the right, we've got some whetstones and rubbing stones. The surfaces are so smooth, really well worn. They would have been used to work leather, sharpen tools, amongst other things. Found quite a few of those, which is also exciting. So we couldn't have done the dig without our amazing volunteers, from excavation to recording to fines washing to bringing us cake and ice pops, to the energy brought by all of the volunteers every day. Every single one of them were brilliant. We couldn't have done it without them. And we achieved so much with the excavation. We established the level of damage caused on the ramparts. We established the construction methods. We established that there were 2 different phases of construction for the ramparts. And in the main trench, we positively identified the presence of surviving archaeology and the depth of surviving archaeology. And more importantly, we didn't get to the bottom of it. So there's plenty more to come. And surface deposits showing us signs of various industrial activity, from weaving to metalworking, and datable material as well in the form of pottery and work flint means that we can date our site, and we really have a good idea of what was happening on this fort and what kind of age it was happening. So yeah, there's just a nod towards our dig timeline and dig page, where you can find out more about the Cherish project, more about dig ventures, and you can sign up for announcements about Dig Caerfai 2022. So hopefully we'll be coming back next year, but we'll wait and see. And that's it from us.